Good afternoon and a warm welcome to members of the media and our viewing public. Thank you for joining with us. I am Kavita Sukram, Corporate Communications Officer at the Ministry of Finance and your moderator for this press conference. We have with us the Honorable Colm Imbert, Minister of Finance. When the Minister is finished with his contribution, we will be taking questions from the media. So ladies and gentlemen, I will now pass you over to the Honorable Colm Imbert, Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much. The purpose of this press conference this morning is to give an update on our fiscal situation in terms of the revenue for the first 4 months of the financial year, and that is the period October the 1st to January the 31st of October the 1st of 2020 to January the 31st of 2021. We, the government, thought it was necessary to bring you up to date on the continuing negative effects of COVID-19 on the Trinidad and Tobago economy. Trinidad and Tobago is no different to any other country in the world in this respect. Like all oil and gas-based economies, COVID-19 has hit us very hard. The official budget estimate of revenue for the period under examination, October 1st, 2020 to January 31st, 2021, the first 4 months of the fiscal year, was based at the time on all available information at the end of September 2020. And that estimate of revenue for this first 4 months was $13.823 billion. However, primarily as a result of the adverse effects of the pandemic, the actual revenue collection for this 4-month period was $12.02 billion, a negative variance of $1.803 billion, or 13% less than the estimates. The shortfall in revenue occurred in a number of areas. Firstly, taxes on income and profits was down by $436 million, or 9% compared with estimates. Could you go to the slides, please, Kavita? Okay, come to the next slide. Second slide. Slide 2. Right. So if one looks at this graph, the blue line is the situation in the years of 2018 and 2020. So you see that in the period 2018 to 2019, the actual revenue as compared to the projected revenue is fairly close. We were fairly good in terms of our estimates and the actual financial outturn. If you look at the year 2020, you see that there was a sharp fall in actual revenue as compared to projected revenue. Could you go to the next slide? Now, this is what is happening for the first quarter of this fiscal year. This is now an illustration of what's going on in the first 4 months of fiscal 2021. You will see that the estimate of revenue for the first 4 months, as I indicated, was $13.8 billion. That's the blue line. But the actual was $12.02. That's the red line. So let me move on now. The shortfall in revenue for the first 4 months of the fiscal year occurred in a number of areas. Firstly, taxes on income and profits was down by $436 million, or 9% compared with estimates. Could you go to the next slide, please? Go ahead. Right. Again, if you look at this slide, this gives you the situation for the fiscal years 2018, 2019, and 2020. And this is taxes on incomes and profits as our overall figure. And you will see again in 2018 and 2019, the actual outcome and the projected outcome, the estimates were almost the same, almost identical. You see the two lines, the blue and the red, together. Blue is projected and red is actual. 2020, COVID hit us. You see the sharp fall off in taxes and incomes on profits. That's the red line dropping down. Go to the next slide. And now let's look at what is going on in the first quarter, first 4 months of fiscal 2021. The blue was what we projected. We projected the taxes on incomes and profits to be about 4.85 billion. And as you can see, it's really $4.4 billion. So the red is the actual collection of taxes on incomes and profits for the first 4 months of this fiscal year. And the blue is the projected. Are we okay there? Everything okay? Good. So if I could just give some elements now. Taxes from oil companies was down by 268 million, or a whopping 39.7%. This was a direct result of depressed prices for oil and gas and lower than expected production volumes. Could you go to the next slide? Next slide. Hold on. Again. No, go back up. Right. Again, this is an illustration of what was happening in 2018, 19, and 20. 18 and 19, you see the blue line was what we estimated. The red line was what actually happened. Again, the taxes on incomes and profits from oil companies was almost exactly what we estimated in 2018 and 2019. But look at the sharp fall off in 2020. And now let's go to 2021. That's the next slide. Again, you would have seen our revenue projection for taxes from oil companies for the first 4 months of the year. It's close to 700 million, whereas the reality is closer to 400 million, the red line. So taxes from oil companies down by 268 million, or 39.7%. Taxes from other companies, and that is categorized as manufacturing, services, and petrochemicals, was down by 133 million, or 8.4%. So let's go to the next slide. Right. So this is an illustration of other companies, non-energy companies, although the petrochemical sector is in this group. Again, look at 18 and 19. The actual is in fact better than the estimates. Whereas in 2020, the red line, see how it drops because of COVID. Let's go to the first 4 months of 2021. The estimate was 145, and the actual is down somewhere around 122. So it was down by 133 million, 8.4%. Taxes from individuals, let's go to the next one. So we have that slide up there. Now let's keep going. Keep going. All right, let's leave that for now. Taxes from individuals was down by 27%, only 1.4%, 27 million, sorry. Let me repeat that. Taxes from individuals, that's the pay-as-you-earn system, down by 27 million, just 1%. So that's a positive indicator. It means that individual income tax is remaining more or less stable. Taxes on international trade, that's a slide up on the screen, and that is another name for import duties, down by 46 million, which is just 4.8%. Again, not too bad. Next slide. Keep going. Right. Or go back up to the preceding slide, please. Right. Look at taxes on international trade for the first 4 months of 2021. It was supposed to be 950 million, actually in the vicinity of a little less than 910 million. So there was a decrease, but not significant. Go to the next slide, please. Go again. Stamp duties. Now, this is an indicator of investment. Stamp duty is paid on transactions such as the sale of property, sale of houses, the sale of company shares, and so on. The original estimate for stamp duty for the first 4 months of this year, as you can see, was a little over 115 million. But it came in actually at closer to 85 million. So stamp duty down by $25 million, or 22%, which reflects a risk-adverse posture in the commercial sector. Let's move on now to non-tax revenue. Keep going. Non-tax revenue includes a large component of royalties on oil and gas. And that's a big area of revenue for the government. Look at the amounts. $12 billion. That's 12,000 million on the left-hand side on the y-axis. So that in fiscal years 18 and 19, the actual royalties from oil and gas exceeded projections. That's the red line. So we did better in terms of royalties from oil and gas in 2018 and 2019 than we expected. Then look at what happens 2020. The actual is far less than the projected. Again, that's the effect of COVID. Let's go to next slide. And this is the first 4 months of 2021. We were expecting to get 2.7 billion or so from non-tax revenue, which is primarily royalties. And as you could see, we're down to a little below $2 billion. And royalties on oil and gas was down by $806 million, or 49%. And that is as a result of depressed oil and gas prices and lower than expected petroleum volumes. We also expected to get extraordinary receipts from oil and gas companies arising from the negotiations that the Honorable Prime Minister did with Shell and BP and those companies when he traveled around the world to the various headquarters of the oil companies. We expected to get extraordinary receipts from those companies of about $100 million, and that's down by 98% because it's based on profits in the oil and gas sector, and those were virtually cancelled by COVID. Let's go down. Next. Keep going down. Right. Look at state enterprises. State enterprises have struggled since 2018, actually. The blue line is what we expected to get from state enterprises. The red line is what we actually got. And this is a function of the National Gas Company, which has not been making the kinds of profits that it had been making in previous years because of the prices of petrochemicals, because there's a profit sharing arrangement based on the sale price of ammonia, urea, ethanol, etc., and also because of the price that they are paying for gas from the producers. So even in 2018, 2019, and 2020, there was a significant fall-off in terms of profits from state enterprises. We expected to get $3 billion in 2020, but $500 million, a significant drop. Let's go on. And you look at, this is what is going on in the first 4 months of the fiscal year. We expected to get $145 million from state enterprises. We're down in the vicinity of $120 million. There's also a particular tax called the unemployment levy, which pays for our unemployment relief program and our reforestation program. It's a tax charge on the profits of petroleum companies, and it's down by 52 million or 56% over the last 4 months. Now, the effect of all of this is that the government has been seriously challenged in the first 4 months of the financial year to find the money necessary to keep the country running and to meet mandatory commitments. And we've had to resort to loan financing and withdrawals from the Heritage and Stabilization Fund to make up the shortfall between income and expenditure. So far, we have borrowed $3 billion for direct budgetary support. This is within the first 4 months of the fiscal year, and withdrawn the equivalent of a further $2 billion TT from the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. And this was done simply to pay salaries and wages and pensions and keep our health sector functioning in the face of the demands of COVID-19. Payment of salaries and wages for the approximately 90,000 workers in the public sector has always been our top priority, followed by senior citizens' pensions, social welfare payments, health care, support for key state enterprises such as the Water and Sewage Authority, debt servicing, National Security Police Service, and subsidies and transfers for public transportation, education, and so on. We've also been careful not to stop ongoing government construction projects, since this is a major source of employment and economic stimulus. These essential payments, or mandatory payments as we call them, cost the country a staggering $3.5 billion per month, each and every month. And in order to make these essential payments, releases for goods and services have had to be reduced, which is creating its own problems as bills accumulate for rent, janitorial, and private security services, among other things. It has been difficult. And running persistent budget deficits and increasing the public debt without limits is just unsustainable. Going forward, we must change our approach as a country and make serious choices as to what we use our scarce resources for. I don't need any more of the slides for the time being. For example, over the last 3 years, we have supported WASA by way of loan financing for its basic operations to the tune of $2.27 billion just in 3 years, including a loan facility of $675 million in 2020 just to pay for desalinated water, which is already spent and must be replenished, that loan facility. Through direct subventions, again for its operating expenses, we have provided WASA with a further $1.67 billion per year, making the total financial support to WASA over the last 3 years equal to $7.28 billion. In all that funding, WASA still struggles to pay its bills to suppliers and contractors. Similarly, TNTech requires support of over $800 million a year to pay for the gas used to produce electricity and to service a series of loans that have been taken out over the years to give it its budget support. TT Post gets financial support of $80 million a year. The Solid Waste Management Company costs $115 million per year. PTSE, bus transport, is subsidized to the tune of $300 million a year. And the inter-island ferry service costs over $400 million a year in subsidies when all costs are taken into account. These are just some examples of subsidies and transfers that make up almost 50% of the annual budget. COVID-19 has also adversely affected the air transportation sector, requiring subsidy by the government of Caribbean Airlines to the tune of $700 million over the last 12 months. The Airports Authority is also hemorrhaging, since with the borders being closed, it is earning little or no revenue while incurring significant operational costs. And if the trend for the first 4 months of the financial year continues, we may lose up to $5 billion in revenue for fiscal 2021. And this is primarily as a result of depressed production and low prices of natural gas. In particular, we've been particularly affected by natural gas, and I will speak about that in a little while. To finance this unplanned deficit will require additional unbudgeted borrowing and further withdrawals from the Heritage and Stabilization Fund in this year. But that approach is not sustainable, and we must also move to control expenditure. By next month, as announced in the budget, the retail fuel sector should be fully liberalized, thus removing the requirement for a fuel subsidy, which has cost taxpayers as much as $7 billion in 1 year, and that was 2014. We also expect that the Regulated Industries Commission will adjudicate on appropriate levels of water and electricity rates in 2021. Ministerial teams have reported on proposals for the restructuring of WASA for greater efficiency and the introduction of a private operator at the Port of Portishead, with the objective being to increase revenue and reduce costs where feasible. These reports are currently being reviewed. But as we move forward, our primary objective as a government must be to preserve jobs and maintain essential government services. In this context, demands from trade unions for wage increases with associated billions of dollars in back pay are difficult to understand. With a persistent budget deficit and uncertainty as to when the global and local economy will fully recover from the destructive effects of COVID-19, we simply can't afford significant wage increases at this time. And by way of example, the Industrial Court has determined a wage increase for National Petroleum, with consolidation of COLA going back 9 years to 2011. I am told, and I've looked at the figures, that the effective wage increases were in excess of 20%. And having implemented these increases, NP has moved from barely breaking even to a loss position of over $50 million in 2020, which is just not sustainable. Let me go now and explain some of the things that are happening in the energy sector. And I simply want to repeat that if excessive wage increases are granted in the state sector, then employment levels may have to be affected because the money is just not there. Our focus is on keeping people in jobs, preserving jobs. Let me now read a document that I received from the Ministry of Energy. And this gave explanations as to what is happening. For example, in the first quarter of the fiscal, which is really a 3-month period, October to December, the royalty that had been budgeted by the Ministry of Energy from BP was $480 million. The actual royalty received from BP for the first quarter of the fiscal year was $164 million. The difference, a reduction of $336 million. This was as a result of two factors. The actual sales from BP was 1.7 billion standard cubic feet per day or less, compared to a budget of 1.9 billion standard cubic feet per day. So BP's production is significantly less than originally estimated by the Ministry of Energy. The actual price received from BP was $1.32 per million standard cubic feet, compared to the budget figure of $3 per million standard cubic feet. In addition, BP suffered because planned works such as the Cassia compression project and other works were affected by COVID-19. They were not able to do the infrastructure work that they had planned to do over the last 12 months. Shell wasn't that bad. The royalty budgeted was $181 million. We got, it was actually, I take that back. This was terrible. The royalty budgeted was $180 million. The actual was 10. I was misreading. I thought it had dropped by 10. It has dropped by $171 million. So the Ministry of Energy had expected us to get $181 million in royalty from Shell for the first 3 months. We got $10 million. Sales from Shell, the production was estimated to be 750 million standard cubic feet per day. It was actually 442, almost half. The actual price received from the Shell contracts was way below the budget price of $3 per million standard cubic feet. And production fell due to unplanned compression and platform works. With respect to BHP, the budgeted royalty from BHP was $108 million for the first 3 months. We received 50. The actual receipts were half what was estimated. Volumes produced by BHP was an average of 360 million standard cubic feet a day, as compared to the estimates made by the Ministry of Energy in October of last year of 450 million standard cubic feet. And of that reduction from 450 to 360, BHP re-injects gas for its operations, so the actual production was actually 262 million standard cubic feet per day instead of 450. The price received from BHP was better than the others. they receive US $2.23 compared to the budget price of $3 and compared to the other prices of $1.32 and so on. EOG, the actual royalty budgeted was 84 million. Sorry, the projected royalty budgeted was 84 million, actual 35 million, a variance of 49 million, a reduction of more than 50%. The budget volume calculated by the Ministry of Energy, 350 million standard cubic feet per day. Actual for the period, 220 million standard cubic feet per day. Actual price, US dollars 230 per million standard cubic feet instead of US $3, and so on. So the energy sector has been significantly affected in the last 4 months. They've had problems with production, they've had problems with equipment, they've had problems with infrastructure, and they've had problems with prices, world prices for natural gas. The petrochemical sector, similarly affected. So I thought I would just give you some of those details to give you an idea of what we are facing in the Ministry of Finance. But I want to reiterate that the government's primary objective is to preserve jobs, keep people in jobs, pay wages and salaries, and pay what we call mandatory payments, and they are mandatory, as I indicated: salaries and wages, pensions, social welfare payments, debt servicing, keep the health sector going, continue to subsidize the water sector, continue to subsidize public transportation, and so on. But I wanted to bring the population up to date with respect to the very difficult situation that we are facing. I'm confident we'll get through this. We will have to borrow more money than anticipated. We will have to withdraw some more money from the Heritage Fund than anticipated. And we must continue with our restructuring of inefficient state enterprises. So I'll now open the floor to questions.
Thank you, Minister. Before we proceed with questions, we kindly ask all reporters to identify yourself by stating your name and the media house that you are representing before you pose your question. We will allow 2 questions per reporter in the first instance, and once time permits, we will take any additional. Please keep your questions relevant. 1 question per.
1 o'clock.
Okay.
You have to finish it.
All right, so I go straight to the question. Good day, Ryan.
Hi, good day, Ryan Hamilton Davis, Trinidad Newsday. Some very interesting information here. You did point out a couple minutes ago that the situation concerning price reason in prices for several different organizations may be difficult, especially with the high amount. What I was wondering is, what would be the optimal amount of increase in wages so that jobs could still be preserved, but people get an increase?
Well, the point I'm making is that any increase at all will have an effect on the overall balance of payments, the overall budget deficit, and we reach a point as a country where we're into a zone now where we just can't continue to borrow money to finance what is called recurrent expenditure. Salaries and wages is recurrent expenditure. It's not productive sector. It's not capital expenditure. It doesn't create or stimulate economic activity per se. So that the point I am making is that right now we're struggling simply to pay current wages and salaries. That's the point I'm making. But we will continue to make that our primary objective.
Okay, go to our next question. Hi, good day. Hi, good day, Curtis. Are you hearing us?
Yes, I'm hearing you all now. Can you hear me?
Hearing you.
All right, Minister, can you say you've pointed about the shortfall in revenue from all sectors, including taxes on profits and so on. With the COVID-19 having hit since March in terms of Trinidad and Tobago, wasn't it reasonable to expect that there would have been significant shortfall in profits from different companies, and perhaps you should have been a little more conservative in your projections? That's the first question. The second question is with respect to the oil and gas, particularly the performance of the gas companies. Would you say? Can you explain what could be done to increase production, or is it at this stage government is really helpless in doing that?
Okay, with respect to the first question, as I've told you before, I just want to reiterate that when we do the budget exercise, because energy sector revenue is such a large part of revenue, we interrogate the Ministry of Energy just to make sure that the information we are getting is as accurate as it possibly can be. And there are a number of areas that you get revenue from the energy sector, such as taxes on incomes and profits, royalties, supplemental petroleum tax, the other small taxes like the unemployment levy, the oil impost, and so on. What has happened is that there were projections, and this is not just from the Ministry of Energy, but also from the various energy forecasting organizations such as the Energy Information Administration of the United States, the World Bank, the IMF, the European forecasters that forecast oil prices and so on. There were projections of price for natural gas going into 2021 post-COVID of somewhere in the vicinity of in excess of $3. That has not happened. That the gas price that we have received is significantly below that $3. But when you do your estimates, you have to base it on information you receive from the experts, so that we based our estimates of price after interrogating the officials on the figures produced by that ministry. And I can tell you, as I told you before, that the original estimates of revenue we got from the Ministry of Energy were not, in my opinion, realistic. They were a bit too high, so we cut them down. But as we go down now into the first part of this fiscal year, we realize the price we're getting is not what was projected, not just here, but abroad. But production is being severely affected. And I did some investigation into BP, for example. I understand there's some platform being constructed in Mexico that is required for maintaining and increasing gas supply in Trinidad and Tobago. And this is what I was told anecdotally, that this platform, the completion of this platform has been delayed by 6 months because Mexico is on a lockdown. So it's just that BP happened to select Mexico as a location for the construction of this platform, gas platform, and they're stuck. So COVID has affected the ability of the oil and gas companies in a profound way in terms of production. So we're getting hit both by production decreases and also by unforeseen prices. On the flip side, look at oil. Oil today is $60. That was not projected. The price of oil that we have in the budget is $45. So that the oil prices now are way above what we expected oil prices to be. But again, the estimates were based on the best available data from the experts, both here and abroad. If you check the EIA, if you check the World Bank, IMF, you would see they were projecting an oil price of $45 for 2021. It's 60. But they were projecting a gas price of $3.50. It's close to 2. So when you do your estimates at the beginning of the year, we in the ministry, we rely on the experts. We interrogate them, of course. With respect to what can be done in the energy sector, I think that will require a united approach between the government and the various companies. As you know, I'm the Minister of Finance, I'm not the Minister of Energy. But in my opinion, it definitely requires all interest groups coming together to see what can be done to increase production. I can't give you any specific answer at this point in time.
Hi, good day. Tip 6.
Hi, good afternoon. Alicia Boucher from TV6. Minister, I just want to ask two simple questions. The first is, are we in a recession? Are we heading towards a recession based on the figures that you are presenting? And the second question is, what are the plans that we have for replenishing the drawdowns that we've had to use from the Heritage and Stabilization Fund, and the time frame within which we would be able to replenish that fund?
With respect to the first question, I'm simply reporting that the actual revenue we've received is about 13% less than we expected it to be. Some of the sectors of the economy are doing quite well. The non-oil sector is doing quite well. So I wouldn't want to speculate at this point in time as to whether we're in a recession or not. I mean, the economy went way down with COVID, and the entire world expects all economies to rise back up from that low level. So I wouldn't want to comment on that at this point in time. With respect to your other question, I don't think you fully understand how deposits are made to the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. That fund receives surplus petroleum revenues. So if you have a projection as to petroleum revenues that you expect to get over a fiscal year, and you get much more than you anticipated, then you take the surplus and you put it in the fund. We're in a situation now where petroleum revenues are much less than we thought they would be, and therefore there's no surplus to put in the fund. It's as simple as that. So the fund will not be replenished by deposits. The fund is growing from, believe it or not, the performance of the stock market over the last 6 months. In fact, it's done very, very well. We took $1 billion US out of that fund over the last 12 months or so, and the value in the fund dropped just by a couple $100 million because it grew through returns from the stocks and the other instruments, the bonds and equities and so on that the fund is built on. It's earning, believe it or not, that fund is earning between 300 and 500 million US dollars a year from the assets in the fund. So the fund itself is generating income from its own assets. But in terms of deposits, that can't happen. Not in a situation where revenues from petroleum are much less than expected.
We take our next question. Good day, reporter.
Hi again, Ryan Hamilton Davis from the Trinidad Newsday. Real quick question, seeing as we are talking about HSF and other financing methods, what are the mechanisms that government has available, especially well, HSF and well, IDB, all these other mechanisms. What kind of mechanisms would we have to actually continue borrowing, and can the country afford that excess debt at this point in time?
There are three ways you can get non-tax revenue. Borrowing is one, obviously. In our case, we are fortunate we have a heritage fund. It's still close to $6 billion US dollars after all this time and all these financial problems we've had because it has performed so well. I think it's 5.8 billion is what is the last figure I saw last week. So you can continue to withdraw from the fund in a reasonable, measured, professional, mature way. We can borrow both locally and internationally. We still have a fairly good credit rating, so people are willing to lend the country money. And then you can sell state assets. This is not a time to sell state assets. This is not a seller's market. This is a buyer's market. So if you went to market now to try and dispose of state assets, you wouldn't get value for them. So we will have to look at borrowing and withdrawals from the Heritage Fund, as well as containing expenditure. Even the IMF has said, if you read the international publications, even the IMF has said that this is a time for countries to borrow money. All of the traditional frameworks and metrics and ways of measuring what your debt to GDP ratio should be. That has all gone out the window with COVID. Of course, the rating agencies will be very strict in the way they look at these things. But I mean, you take the United Kingdom, their debt to GDP crossed 100%, just like that, because they couldn't cope with the effects of COVID in the UK, and it's getting worse over there. Their budget deficit went up about 8 times from what they originally expected. You see what's going on in the United States. They have $1 trillion fiscal stimulus to deal with the effects of COVID. Developing countries, same problem. India's debt to GDP close to 100. So that all of the institutions, the financial institutions, World Bank, IDB, IMF, etc., have recognized that these are very unique times and governments will have to borrow to keep the economies going. But there will come a point where we have to slow it down. And we are close. You know, our debt to GDP ratio is now over 80%. And you see, unlike the United States, they can just print money. You see that stimulus package that President Biden just got through, $2 trillion or whatever the number is, some very large number, 2,000 billion US dollars. They could just go in Congress and pass that and just open up Fort Knox and just print. It doesn't matter because the US dollar is what is called a reserve currency. So it's based on demand. So as long as there's a demand for United States dollars in the world, they can just print. And all the other countries with reserve currencies, they can just print. So they are in a much better place than developing countries, small, open economies like ours, where we are not a reserve currency. Our currency is not easily convertible. It's not in any great demand. The TT dollar is not in demand around the world. So we have to be very, very careful. But with the plans that we have, which is to continue to draw down from the fund within reason, do some more borrowing, and also to try and curtail expenditure in areas where it is possible, we will make it through. But the whole point is to let people know that we're in a difficult place at this point.
We have a question from Nadine Singh, CL Communications Network. A question: when does the government plan to go to the Parliament to do the withdrawal from the HSF? And 2, how much money is likely to be withdrawn from the HSF?
Okay, we don't have to go to the Parliament to do that. We amended the Heritage and Stabilization Fund Act last year to allow, in the event of 3 disastrous situations, a serious infectious disease, I think they call it, like COVID, earthquake, hurricane, things like that, natural disaster, and then a precipitous or calamitous drop in the price of oil and gas or production volumes. And once you have those 3 scenarios or any one of them, the government can withdraw a significant sum from the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. We simply have to report to the Parliament, but we don't have to seek permission to do that. So that we have the flexibility to withdraw within the limits of what was debated in the Parliament last year.
Hi, Priya.
Hi, good afternoon, Priya Bihari, ACP News. Minister, I was just wondering, are there any projects you have that you will look to increase the revenue of the country? And secondly, what is the status with the Point of View refinery and the bid that was made by WQ? And the last one that was submitted. Thank you.
Well, one of the things that we're going to try and keep moving is our development program. We had quite a few plans at the beginning of this fiscal year in terms of a housing thrust, in terms of road construction, etc. As I said, we are trying to keep our construction projects going because they provide employment and economic stimulus in a large number of areas in the manufacturing sector, etc. So construction will continue to be an important tool in terms of stimulating the economy and also employing people. With respect to refinery, well, the Patriotic got a deadline of the 5th of February, last week Friday, to submit a firm and binding offer. and we received correspondence on Friday, and we are currently reviewing that correspondence, their submission. I wouldn't want to say anything else at this point.
Hi, Curtis, go right ahead.
Yeah, hi, Minister. I realized that you looked at the performance of the NGC, and the NGC's performance declined markedly since 2018. Do you realize that that 2018 date is the same date that the new prices that were negotiated or helped the Prime Minister and Minister Young, etc., helped seal that deal, that those prices kicked in 2018? And you as well identified higher prices as a problem facing the NGC. Would you say that the negotiations, the new prices negotiated by the Prime Minister and Minister Young is partly responsible for the challenges that the NGC faces today?
That's it? Okay. I think that's a very unfair question, Curtis. I mean, I certainly would not answer the question the way you posed it. But what I would say is that no one would have known in 2018 what would have happened to petrochemical prices and or LNG prices, for example. And the price, the revenue that NGC gets is based on the end prices of these commodities. So as the price of methanol falls, the price of urea falls, the price of LNG falls, NGC's revenue naturally falls. So that I would think that the reason why the NGC is struggling is because of these depressed prices for commodities such as petrochemicals, liquefied natural gas, and so on.
Hi, TV6.
Thank you. Hi, Minister. One last quick question. A little while ago, you mentioned that this is not the time to sell off state assets. It's a buyer's market, not a seller's market. And based on what you said, I was wondering, are we really heading in the right direction at this point in time as it relates to selling the Point-of-Bear refinery?
The Point-of-Bear refinery only has value if somebody is willing to buy it. You see, there's a lot of speculation as to how you value an asset. If you have a house, for example, you might figure the house is worth $10 million. When you put it out for sale, you might get one. So that in the case of the Point-of-Bear refinery, the objective is not just to earn money. The objective of disposing of the refinery to the private sector, let's call it that, because the trade union would fall into the category of the private sector, is simply to restart economic activity. That's it. Of course, you want to get the best price you possibly can for the asset, because it is a state asset. But I would think, on balance, to answer your question, I would think this is a good time if all things were equal and if proposals made sense. That is a good time to try and stimulate as much economic activity as possible. So the whole point of the refinery is to stimulate, of restarting the refinery is to stimulate activity, to create employment, and to save foreign exchange and things like that. So even though this is not the best time to sell assets, I think that falls into a special category. But I want to stress that anything that the government does, it must be very mindful of the value of state assets and be very careful that we are the custodian of the people's assets in anything that we do.
We have time for one more.
Do I have to? Yeah, we'll have 5 minutes. Problem.
Ryan, good day. Again.
Hi again, Ryan Hamilton, Davis Newsday. Going back to projects and so on, I mean, I know you mentioned the housing projects would still be on because it provides jobs, it stimulates the economy. But what about financial support projects, like, for example, the agricultural fund that was mentioned in the budget last year, about 500 million. Can projects like that continue with the state of the economy right now?
Most definitely. In fact, I'm kind of pushing the Minister of Agriculture to produce specific projects so that we can disburse the funds from that allocation. I think that's very interesting, very important, and it is something that we will push. It's not something that we will suppress. So that agricultural program will continue. within reason, of course. We can go to one. No?
We have another question.
They started lotto thing.
Given the declaration, this is from Nadine. Given the declaration that oil prices have recovered, does this mean that government is likely to peg the budget at a higher oil price?
Well, the oil contributes now maybe about 25% or less of revenues from petroleum. None of us have a crystal ball, as I said. Nobody expected after oil went to zero. Remember in February of 2020 or March, sometime like that, oil went from $30 to $20 to $10 to zero. It went to negative. In fact, it was so terrible in the United States that people were paying people to offload oil. It was really bad. It then stuck in the $10 range, the $20 range for quite a while. And so it had to inch up to 25, 30, which is at the point where Heritage Petroleum began to make money. Prior to that, Heritage Petroleum was not selling oil. It didn't make sense because they would have been selling it for a price that was lower than it cost to produce. And now it inched up 35, 40, 45, 50, and now it's 60. Nobody knows how long that would last because oil prices are affected by a series of geopolitical factors. They have three big players in the oil industry: Saudi Arabia, United States, and Russia. And any number could play with those three big players. In the United States, their dependence is on shale oil, and they need a particular price. When the price is too low, the shale oil companies stop producing and they can't generate enough money to be profitable. Once the price gets above a certain amount, I would say maybe $45, $50, the shale oil producers in the United States have to ramp up. That's what's happening right now. In Russia is very lucky. It has vast reserves of oil. It has low production costs and so on. Saudi Arabia, production costs lowest in the world. So these three players interfere with the market all the time, manipulate the market. So I am not going to guess as to what oil price should be. We will simply rely on what the experts tell us going forward, as we have always done for the last 5 years. Okay? All right, that's it, Kavita?
Yes.
I think they have to go to lunch.
Yes, that's it for questions today. We thank members of the media and the viewing public for joining with us at this press briefing. Do enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much. Okay, bye-bye.